Soviet Union covered 1/6 of the earth. Never before has the world tried to revive and rebuild a state that massive. Doing the job right may drain much of the capitalist world's wealth. Failure could bring back the dictators. So the post-Cold War world has a new challenge, making sure it holds on to its victory over communism. Linda Freeman, CBN News.
Thanks, Linda. Joining me now is a distinguished journalist who recently traveled to Russia to report on the new Commonwealth of Independent States. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the 700 Club author and senior correspondent for Time magazine from Washington, D.C., David Aikman. David, thank you. You interviewed Boris Yeltsin. We have a picture of you traveling in a limousine in the back seat talking to him. What were your impressions?
Well, I felt on my first acquaintance with Yeltsin in any depth in 1989 that he was greatly underestimated by the White House at the time. He has an uncanny intuition, an amazing inability to grasp what people think and feel that he's talking to, and...
Excuse me, did you say inability or ability?
Ability.
Ability,
yes.
all right.
Amazing ability.
Yes.
And a great vision that he's not very good at articulating in short-term policies, but which I think makes a lot of sense in the long term.
He was portrayed as a buffoon, a drunk, somebody that wasn't acceptable in the State Department and the coterie of the leaders of the world, whereas Gorbachev was. I mean, you don't think that the reality fits that stereotype?
No, I think it was one of the biggest foreign policy mistakes the White House has made in the last 3 years. What happened was he had had too much to drink the night before when he visited Brent Scowcroft in 1989. He talked too much. He was a little bit gauche. Mm-hmm. But as a matter of fact, to base a judgment of this fellow's abilities on one-hour meeting was, I think, foolish. And worse than that, Pat, all kinds of stories were leaked about him, which damaged considerably our ability to assess what he was like.
Scowcroft that powerful that his snap impression would color the entire administration?
Well, what happened was, and this isn't generally known, Yeltsin thought he was meeting with Bush. He did, in fact, meet with Bush. But he wasn't sure when he was going into the White House whether it had been set up. And he said, I'm not going to see some low-level official. Well, Scowcroft is not exactly a low-level official. And I think Scowcroft took umbrage at that and judged him very negatively on that basis.
Incredible.
Yeah.
The things that turn politics.
I know.
What do you see? You have been correspondent in Eastern Europe, China, Middle East, so forth. What do you see happening 1 year, 2 years, 5 years to this new Commonwealth?
Well, I think if Yeltsin is able to maintain stability in Russia, if they can get over this very painful transition to a free market economy, if they can do so while building democratic institutions. In other words, if Russia doesn't go crazy, then the countries of Eastern Europe, particularly Czechoslovakia and Poland, have a very good chance of getting their economies moving and becoming very stable. Now, as far as Russia and the Commonwealth itself is concerned, that depends on the situation republic by republic. Russia has good chances, the Ukraine has good chances, maybe, well, Belarus and maybe Kazakhstan. But the former Islamic republics of Soviet Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, which are basically third world Islamic states, I think are going to be strongly tempted by Islamic fundamentalism. And that could be very dangerous to stability.
Does that mean a Turkey model, or does that mean an Iranian model, or does it mean Saudi with the Sunnis?
Good question, Pat. In the case of Azerbaijan, the Turkey model would be quite good because Turkey is a secular state.
Yes.
And has managed to keep its fundamentalists in balance with the rest of society. So if Azerbaijan, which is Shiite, goes that way, no big problem. The real issue are the dirt-poor Central Asian republics of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, which could be tempted by what I would call a sort of Sunni fundamentalist model, a little different from Iran, but pretty totalitarian nevertheless.
Hunger, food, money. It looks like the ruble is out of control and that people may be close to starvation. Now, is that an overstatement of the situation?
No, it's not an overstatement, Pat. I was in St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, at the turn of the year, and they now celebrate, our viewers would be interested to know, the Russian Christmas as a national holiday, and that's January the 7th in the old calendar. Many people there didn't even have enough food for a regular meal that day, much less a holiday meal. There is genuine malnutrition taking place in some of the Russian cities. And unless we get aid in fast and distribute it, it'll get worse.
I watched Gorbachev before the podium day after day after day in endless, mindless debate over things and no action whatsoever to feed those people. Was there something deliberate to undermine this? Could people be so foolish to let a society just completely fall apart?
Well, I think with Gorbachev, you had the combination of a highly intelligent man who could never get over his communist background, Pat. He remains to this day convinced that communism ought to have worked, and the reason it didn't wasn't because, as we know, it's flawed from the premise upwards, but because people hadn't managed it properly. He couldn't grasp that people basically won't work unless there's some personal incentive. And because of that, he refused to make the decisions to turn Russia over to a free enterprise society.
And as a result, just that obvious thing just allowed the forces of decay to accelerate.
If Gorbachev had not reneged on the agreement with Yeltsin in November 1990 to get going on the so-called 500-day plan, they would be much further along on reform than they are today.
What should, if you were advising George Bush and you had his ear instead of Brent Scowcroft, what would you tell him in relation to the Soviet Union?
Well, I think you have to do two things. I mean, we are going through a recession, so we can't mount a Marshall-scale plan. But there are two things we have to do. One is to show willingness to provide immediate humanitarian aid, and there has been willingness in that area. More important, Pat, Russia needs moral support. Yeltsin has said, we are now your ally. We're part of the West. Bush should say, we welcome you. We were not against the Russian people ever. We were against the communist regime that ruled them. We welcome you into the Commonwealth of global free countries, and we will support you. That is so important right now for Yeltsin inside Russia.
Well, let's hope it happens. David, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
God bless you. David Aikman, ladies and gentlemen, senior correspondent for Time magazine, and a man who not only is intimately connected with the former Soviet Union, but also Eastern Europe and China and the Middle East. Well, coming up, former tennis pro Kay McDaniel shares her inspiring story. Find out what makes her a true champion next. And on tomorrow's 700 Club, meet the woman who studied transcendental meditation with a master guru. And she gives you the inside story on the New Age movement coming up tomorrow.
Looking ahead to 1992 and beyond and putting it into perspective. The economic outlook. What's over the horizon for the U.S. economy and what specific world events could influence its recovery? Your finances. How can you steer clear of potential hazards while making better investments? Decision 92. What's to be expected in the race for the presidency, and what will we face after the election? The Japanese. How do real estate prices in Japan affect our nation's deficit?